Okay, so I'm very happy to welcome our guest for today, Curtis Watkins. Curtis is a master certified coach, a master somatic coach, and an ontological coach, as well as a former trained actor. Over the past 30 years, he's worked with executives from Fortune 500 companies, law firms, energy companies, government agencies, unions, teachers, students, and parents. Curtis is passionate about having people live the lives they want to live. And to support his clients in doing this, he focuses on leveling up their emotional intelligence, strengthening their executive presence, and illuminating blind spots in their behavior that's affecting their ability to have impact and to advance in life. Curtis, I'm thrilled to be speaking to you today as a coach just at the beginning of my journey, and to speak to someone who's a master coach. It's quite an exciting thing. So thank you for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure, Allison. Great to be here.
Thank you. So I'm just going to jump straight in because I've got loads of questions that I want to pick your brains on today. So first of all, let's just perhaps start with the beginning. You've been coaching with the body for over 30 years. So where did that initial inspiration come from? What got you started on this path?
Actually, there was a fellow coach who was doing these strange things with a long stick out in the yard when I was doing my coach training.
Okay.
And he and I were roommates actually. And I said, what are you doing? And he was working with a Jo, which is a Japanese martial art weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And he was studying with Richard Strozzi Heckler of the Strozzi Institute.
Okay.
And I said, oh, well, I got to get me some of that because that looks really cool. I want to figure out what that's doing. And so that's what started that process.
And what was he doing? Do you recall what he was actually doing? Well, how was he helping people?
Well, what I was watching him do was he was practicing what they call a Jo kata, which kata means practice. So it's a 32-step practice with the Jo, which you can use to inform the body in where you go off center, where you go on center, where you're putting too much strike or not enough strike. It's a very informative process, both for self education as well as other.
Yeah. I can completely imagine, just as you say, sort of noticing what you're doing, what you're not doing, where you're doing it right or wrong, must be incredibly informative.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun because it's outside of the norm, and most people go, so what are we going to do with those big sticks?
So do you use that kind of thing now? Is that part of your practice?
I do. I break it down into bite-sized chunks, so I don't teach the whole 32-step kata. Once I do 5, and then I'll do 5 more, and then I'll do 5 more, and they go away and they practice and they come back and they see how they're doing. And I wait until they've got a level of mastery before we go on to the next one. And it's fascinating. I really love the practice. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that sounds like that experience, seeing him doing that and then going and perhaps doing that training, brought a completely different perspective, perhaps, to where you were going on your initial thinking with the coaching.
Yeah, I mean, because I was studying ontological coaching, which includes the body, but there was no actual formal practice around somatics. There were some ideas around it. The main focus was linguistics and some emotion distinctions, but the distinctions around the body were vague and helpful, but I really wanted a set of distinctions that I could incorporate myself, and I could also teach others to support them in having the lives that they want. And that's why I went to the Strozzi Institute, because their focus, they had coaching, right? But they didn't, their focus was on somatics. And
Right.
that's really what I wanted to dive deeper into. And at that time, I wanted to differentiate myself, because everybody and their grandmother could hang out a shingle and say, I'm a coach, and we
Still
could
the
still,
same case now, of course.
it's,
Anybody they can
yeah,
do a weekend course and like, I'm a coach.
right. And it's like becoming a Reiki master in a 24-hour, whatever.
Yeah.
But so I wanted a differentiation around what kind of coaching I do. And at that point, there was very little somatic coaching happening. And so that was also something that intrigued me. I like
Mm-hmm.
being on the vanguard of things.
Yeah.
And
Bit more
so,
on the cutting edge.
yeah, I was probably the second generation of coaches.
Mm-hmm.
So Fernando Flores, and then my teacher James Flaherty, and Julio Olaya, and then the third generation kind of exploded it.
Yeah.
And here we are. There's 50,000 coaches in the world, or whatever, even more. So it's been a great journey. I love coaching. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful uh, practice, and has alleviated a lot of suffering on the planet.
Mm. You mentioned ontological coaching, and a lot of the people that I think are listening to this may not be aware of what that is. Could you perhaps share a definition or explain a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Sure. My understanding of ontological coaching is ontology is the science or the study of being.
Mm-hmm.
And it really boils down to rather than looking at, and you can also look at it in terms of first tier learning and second tier learning. In first tier learning, you take an action and you create a result. If you're not happy with the result, then you go back and you change your action. You do it faster, you do it slower, you do it more, you do it less, and then see if you can change the result. So that's first tier learning, and it's very valuable. And however, in my experience, it's very limited in actual having transformation. And by transformation, I mean the person changes significantly. And in order to change significantly, we need to go to this what I call, or they call, or we call second tier learning. Which in second tier learning, you take the action, you see the result, you're not happy with the result. What you do is you go back, rather than going back to the action, you go back to the how I'm being in the world, how I actually see the world, and which we can call the how I observe the world, or the observer that I am. And we're all unique observers of the world, and we take action out of that being that we are, and to produce the results we are. So if we actually shift that being that we are, what's possible in my life changes dramatically.
Yeah.
Just to give you an example, and maybe this will help the viewers a little bit. Have you ever decided that you wanted to buy a new car,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, but prior to deciding you wanted to buy a new car, cars just were on the street and didn't really matter at all. But once you decided you were to buy a new car, it was kind of, oh, what kind of car is that? Oh, oh, what kind of car is that? Oh, what kind of car is that? You've shifted how you're observing the world from cars don't really mean anything to, oh, cars are very important to me at the moment. Or to give another example, I know when my wife and I first got pregnant, before we were pregnant, I'm sure there were pregnant people out there, but I really didn't
Pretty
notice,
sure.
right? Pretty sure. But after we got pregnant, there were a lot of pregnant people out
All
there.
you can see. So it's a real shift in attention, isn't it? It's like, where am I focusing my attention? How am I thinking about things?
Yeah, and how am I being? I'm being a potential father here, which I look at the world very differently from the view of, geez, I'm bringing a new life into into existence, and that changes my priorities. It changes the choices that I make. I mean, it's huge. So that's what I mean by ontological coaching, is coaching at the level of being. Let's shift the being that you are, and out of that will come all kinds of different choices that weren't available to you given how you saw the world before.
Yeah. So by shifting, It's not as easy as it sounds, I'm guessing, but by shifting how you're being, then you're getting different perspectives, different viewpoints, and more choice. You're more
Absolutely.
aware and more choice.
Absolutely. So just from a Copernican point of view, before Copernicus, right, the sun revolved around the earth. And
Mm-hmm.
that gave us a certain amount of choices. After Copernicus, the earth revolves around the sun. That just changed everything. First of all, it took knowledge out of the realm of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Up to that point, the church was, if you had a question about life, you went to the church. Now, if you had a question about life, you could still go to the church, but you could also go to science. And that split has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger as we've gone, and has its own shadows and problems. Anyway, that's not what we came here to talk about. But the Copernican revolution was a huge ontological shift. How about COVID-19? That changed who we are,
Totally. What are you
right?
seeing? What are you seeing? Let's talk about it. What changes are you seeing in how people are, and how your coaches are, or how people, what the problems people are coming to you with? What are you seeing?
So, in terms of, you could, I can see it just from uh, the small things, as in masks.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's wearing a mask
Yep.
now, except for those that you can't make me wear, and that's fine, right? It's like I can't and I don't want to, and but just so from that very simple level to go out and interact in any way in public, I need to don a piece of apparel that to me only doctors wore, or
Yeah.
people that clean my teeth,
Yeah.
and now everybody's wearing it. From there are people who live in fear. Their whole existence now is tempered by the fact that if they could die from this. And so they've cut themselves off from their families, their children, their
Mm-hmm.
grandchildren, their friends, their associates, and they have become hermits, basically. And on the other end of the scale are those that, it's a hoax. I don't believe it. I don't care, blah, blah, blah. And they just go out and live their lives almost completely the way they did before, except they can't eat out in a restaurant,
Yeah.
right?
So
But
it's, the world's changed around them, actually. They, even if they want to, they can't live in exactly the same way.
they can't. It's
Yeah.
huge, huge breakdown. And so in terms of your question about what are people coming to me, it's like how I am able to navigate the breakdowns in life
Mm.
is a key life skill. And so this gives us this COVID-19, it gives us a huge opportunity to see, my opinion, what's valuable, what's not valuable, what really is important to me, and what's not. And then given that, make choices out of that. And that's a huge gift.
Mm.
To shut down the world economy,
Yes,
right?
literally. Literally. It's
Literally,
extraordinary. Yeah.
right? Boom. Talk about a breakdown. And I mean breakdown in terms of Martin Heidegger, not in terms of a mental breakdown or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that. A breakdown is an interruption in the anticipated flow of life, right? And there was a lot of anticipated flow of life that got interrupted by
Mm.
COVID-19, just like airlines, travel, vacation, all of that. And so how people navigate around within that is a great opportunity for coaches. It's one of the questions that you forwarded to me before uh, we had our conversation, Allison, was great. So what do you do with people who say, man, I don't need a coach?
Absolutely. That's exactly what I was going to ask you now. In this context, how can coaching help?
And that's how coaching can help, because I can't see what you see, you know, and
Mm.
I am a different observer of the world than you are. So I can help you see things that are unavailable to you, and you can too, just by the fact that you're a different observer.
Yeah.
And it's if they say, well, why do I need a coach? Nobody needs a coach, right? My point of view is that I don't know anyone who couldn't benefit
Mm.
from having a coach. But then we have to define our terms, and defining the term coach means that I, as the coachee, have, and the word is escaping me, but have given you permission to coach me. I have constituted you as my coach.
Yeah.
And that means that I am open and available and willing to explore with you what's going on.
Yes.
And if I don't constitute you as if you don't constitute me as your coach, then there's no coaching that's going to happen.
No, because you're working with someone who's basically uncoachable. This is one of the challenges I think certainly I find when clients are sent to me by, say, the HR department or something, and they do not want to be there. And it's like, well, I can try, but actually, unless they're a willing participant, it's very hard to coach someone who doesn't want to be coached.
Yeah, and that's when I get sent somebody, which is very seldom anymore, and I just don't accept those assignments. My first question is, do you want to be here?
Mm.
And you can tell me honestly, because if you don't want to be here, but you have to be here, is a different conversation that we're going to have than that you want to be here and you have to be here. This is very different. And I'm not going to blow your cover. I'm not going to go and tell them, hey, this person isn't coachable. They don't want to be here.
Mm.
But you have to work with me so we can find something that would benefit you during these 10 sessions, 12, whatever it is, so that we can come into some kind of partnership here. Because we're going to be, HR has determined that this is important. So how do we make the best of it?
How do we make the best of it? Yeah, I think that's it. And you touched on something really nice a few moments ago, Curtis, where you talked about how I observe the world and how you observe the world. And I can, as your coach, I can bring something to you as my coachee. But equally, I see it's the other way as well. I really see the coaching relationship as being very co-creative. So we are creating this new possibility, creating these new awarenesses, almost having these insights together. And I find as a coach, I learn as much from the sessions or get as much out of the sessions as my coachees do. It's a very energizing process because it's so co-creative.
Yeah, it's one of my teachers' favorite expressions. Julio Olaya, the founder of the Newfield Network, he called that what you're just talking about, Alice. He called it the joke of coaching. The joke of coaching. You come to me to get coached on something that I'm working on myself.
Yeah, always. It's always your own stuff.
And it's just, the difference is I am a few steps further down the path.
Yes.
Right. But to your point, we're both benefiting from this exchange, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's one of the things I love about a coaching model is that there's still one up, one down, but there is much more peer aspect to it than, say, standard psychology or psychiatry.
Yeah. And you're trying not to be teaching. It is, I very much see it's like we're going on a journey together. You're bringing something, I'm bringing something. Let's see what we discover. And as you say, as a coach, hopefully you're a few steps ahead. You've got some things you can bring to that, but it's still a journey and a co-creative process.
Yeah, what I'm bringing are distinctions that they probably don't have. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. And what they're bringing is their experience to the life that they've lived that I haven't lived and couldn't possibly know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's so rich and exciting. You never know what's going to happen in any session, do you? I love it.
Me too.
So when people come to you, Curtis, now I know on your website you talk a lot about people living, I think I saw somewhere, lives of quiet desperation and this sense of how do they find their purpose. And I'd just love to get your views on that. How do you help people who are feeling really stuck? What's your approach?
It depends on the person. Mm-hmm. Depends on the conditions. So in Buddhism, they talk about how whatever is present is based on causes and conditions. Mm-hmm. If you change the causes and the conditions, you'll change what's present. Makes sense. And so whatever it is that they're coming with and they're presenting is, I want to know, so what are the causes and what are the conditions that you're living in that has you suffering around X?
Mm-hmm.
And then through language or emotions or the body, we can begin to shift whatever those causes and conditions are so that we can begin to manifest something that is more preferable to the client. And in terms of purpose, um, when people come to me with that journey in mind, um, oftentimes they think that purpose is out there somewhere and you have to find it,
Yeah.
and you might not find it, and if you don't find it, then you're screwed forever. So it's busting up some of those stories, and I'm laughing at myself because I'm working with a creativity teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the first things that they talked about was creativity is inherent in all of us. It's not some of us have it, and those of I myself, I was thinking, well, I'm in the box of those that just don't have it.
Yeah.
And hearing that was so freeing. And it's also with clients, it's like hearing the fact that no, you have a purpose and you can find it. It is available to you. And like you said, which I love, it's like, let's go take a journey and explore. And it's not like you have to find the right purpose. It's like, let's see what we can discover together
Yeah.
and take the pressure off, right? But it's almost always aligned with stuff they like to do.
Yeah. Which makes sense.
You know, and where they get caught up is, and this is our culture as much as anything else, where they get caught up is, yeah, but how do I make a living doing that? And I go, let's worry about that later. Let's really just dive into what it is that you really love to do,
Yeah.
you know, and that's where we go with that. And
So if we've got listeners who are thinking, well, that's me. I'm feeling that sense of I don't know what to do. How do I find it? Is there, aside from getting a coach, obviously, but is there anything else you would suggest they could start thinking about, or ways they could start thinking themselves, or perhaps getting into their body more to perhaps bring some fresh insights? What would you suggest as a starting point?
so there's several different ways. First of all, there are purpose coaches out there.
Mm-hmm.
They're brilliant. Uh, the ones that I know of anyway. And but if you just wanted to start on your own, uh, one of my favorite exercises around this is remember a time that you were really successful and had a lot of fun,
Mm-hmm.
and then journal about that. So what was present that had that be A, fun, and B, success? And
Mm-hmm.
it could be from your childhood, it could be school days, it could be a business thing, anything, right? And what were the key elements there? And once you look at, begin to pick those key elements apart, you go, these are probably related to your purpose in life. These
Mm-hmm.
key elements are pointers, and you can, what did you feel like in your body when you were in this project that you were doing? And wow, I was really excited. I was having a lot of fun. My body was tingling. And it's like, okay. I was like, well, when was the last time you felt that? The day I got married. It's like, well, how long? 20 years ago, whatever. It's
Yeah.
like, so, but you know what it feels like, right? And it's like, okay, so that's one domain, one exercise that can start someone off. And another exercise is just pay attention when you light up.
Mm-hmm.
By light up, I mean when do you feel your body get engaged and get excited and energized? And so when do you light up? When do you smile? When do you, it's like, what are those moments throughout your day? And then if you don't have any of those, then we have a different problem.
Yeah.
Right? That's something. I, I had a client of mine who says, I don't feel joy. And I go, okay, all right. I don't believe you, but let's just go with that. And I said, so here's your assignment. Your assignment for the next week is to go out and notice joy wherever you see it. Well, I don't see joy anywhere. I go, I understand that, but okay, let's just suspend disbelief here for a second and see if you can spot it. Not necessarily in yourself, but on the television, in the movies, on the sidewalk, in a restaurant, wherever you are. If you think somebody might be experiencing some joy, I want you to write that down.
I love that. I'm going to steal that.
Oh, and she was so flabbergasted. The next week when we got on the call, she was joyful, number one, herself, at discovering all this, but you would not believe all the joy she found in the world.
Yeah.
I was like, it's like you find what you're looking for.
So it's the noticing, it's getting into the noticing, sounds like, because I get this as well. Often when I'm coaching, I'll be like, what do you notice in your body? Nothing. Nothing's happening. Okay, so and then you try and break it down a little bit. Well, how are you breathing? Where are you breathing? What's happening? Where are you holding tension? And very slowly, maybe something cracks open. But I find it's fascinating how disconnected we are from our bodies. I was myself. I worked in the corporate world for years and was completely disconnected from my body. Discovered breath work, and at that point, I was like, oh. Because I could never do sports or anything at school. I was like, no, I'm going to be the brainy one. I'm not anything to do with my body. And then suddenly you rediscover it. It's incredible.
It is. It really is. And this is where coaching, for me, there are times when you need to teach. You need to teach a distinction in order to allow the person to discover. Right? It's like, and before you made that distinction for them, it didn't exist. And one of my favorite stories, again, from Julio, is that in terms of distinctions, is when you go out into the night sky and you look up at the sky and you see all these dots in the sky. It's like, okay, but it's really indeterminate. It's just, wow, those are pretty. Or maybe somebody told you what the Milky Way looked like and you go, oh, that's the Milky Way. But the next night you go out with an astronomer, right? And the distinctions that they can make can bring the whole night sky alive in ways that didn't exist. They literally did not exist for you. And the next night you'll go out with an astrologer, right? And they will make distinctions that didn't exist for you the previous night and probably don't exist for the astronomer.
Yes.
Right. So the power of making distinctions for people is huge. Just in terms of linguistics. So working with a client, and I go, I noticed that you use qualifiers a lot in your language, and they go, well, what do you mean by that? I mean, you use the word if, maybe, sort of, kind of, a lot. And did you notice that? And they were working with setting boundaries. That was one of the things. Oh, I need to work on setting boundaries. Okay. And they were unaware of that. And I go, so here's your assignment. Every time you catch yourself using one of those qualifiers, I want you to actually make a declaration. A yes, a no, and see how that feels. And it's just that little distinction, well, it's not so little, can actually have them see, well, if I can't even make a boundary with my language, how am I going to create a physical boundary or an emotional boundary? Anyway, so just at times one has to teach in order to make those distinctions for people. And I think it's a valid part of coaching, even though there are coaching schools who would hit the roof if they heard me say that. You can never ask a leading question.
Well, yes. I mean,
So
I guess it's what is felt needed in the moment. But I think you're right that it's the subtleties of, as you say, of language, of that if people aren't aware of them, what you're trying to do is bring awareness to it, and then it's where do they go with it. So it's a starting point, isn't it?
What's the difference between envy and jealousy? Most people don't know the difference, and I didn't know the difference until the distinction was made for me. And it's not like it's the truth, right? It's just like, here's a distinction that might be helpful for you.
Yeah, it's perspective.
Right? And if it is, great. If it's not, okay. You know, I mean, my co-writer and I, co-author and I, Dan Newby, wrote a book on 150 emotions.
I wanted to ask you about that because the classic thing is we have 6 basic emotions. I think at the most I've seen was 27, and suddenly I see your book 150. Tell me more.
Yeah, and then there's another guy that has 2,500, right?
Wow.
Or what? So it's, for me, it's useful if it is. If these distinctions actually can support you in living the life that you want, great. If having 6 emotions is all you need in order to go forward in life, that's fine too. So, are there 6 basic emotions? Are there 8 basic emotions? Who knows?
Who knows? Absolutely.
All I know is that in exploring, we had to make a cutoff, right? We cut it off at 150 because we could have gone on, and it was, well, how long do we want the book to be? And also, are these distinctions actually continuing to illuminate different aspects of human life? And once we got to this point, we go, well, the illumination is less and less meaningful, so we're going to cut it off here.
Yeah, I imagine you were getting to a finer and finer nuanced gradation of emotion, and then it's like, well, how do I use that? But what inspired you to decide to write the book?
Well, Dan inspired me to write the book because it was his idea, and he did 90% of the work, and he asked me to make a contribution to it, and he was generous enough to make me co-author. I added the somatic stuff. We worked it together. Probably 90% is a little self-effacing, but he just definitely did the lion's share of the work on that book, and he was the inspiration with it. And I really had such a wonderful time collaborating with him. We'd known each other for a long time, and but we never created something together, and you know how that can be. But this was a delight. It was just so easy and so flowing. It was a lot of fun because what I really appreciated was the ability to connect how the body might be responding to each given emotion. Right? What's happening with the breath?
Can you give us a couple of examples, perhaps, Curtis, just so that people can understand a bit more how that flowed through?
Sure. So if you're feeling angry, where's your breath? Is it down low? Is it nice and slow? No.
Probably not.
Probably not. Right. It's up here, right? Usually, I'm not saying this is the truth, but in my experience, and then I ask people, listen, we're not saying this is the truth. Go out and see if it's true for you. And if it's not, great. What is true for you? But at least take a look. So it's up here and it's fast, right? Eyes are really focused.
Popping at you, yep.
Right? Exactly. There's probably, it depends on how angry you are. It's like you might even have some veins popping there. Because we've all seen people angry. It's much easier to see it on somebody else than to see it on yourself.
Yes.
But just notice. So that's anger, right? And so how about when you're feeling peaceful. The kind of like the opposite of anger, right? It's like, where's your breath there? It's, for me, it's in the belly.
Yeah.
It's slow,
Much more
right?
grounded.
I'm kind of leaning back maybe a little bit. It's
Mm.
grounded. All my energy is down.
Yeah.
Anger, my energy is up. So these are the distinctions that are in the book for all the different 150 emotions. And as a coach, it's like oftentimes it's like, so what emotion are you experiencing right now with your client? And they may not know, but then you can ask, so what are you experiencing in your body?
Yeah.
And what's the narrative? Every emotion has a story with it, right? So what are you telling yourself that's evoking this emotion? So the emotional territory is, up until maybe 20 years ago, was so limited, right? Until Daniel Goleman came out with his book,
Yeah.
right?
Emotional intelligence. Yeah.
Emotional intelligence is like, he really gave everybody a big step up in terms of, oh, this is a legitimate domain of learning and exploration, right? And so it's fascinating. It was a lot of fun writing that with Dan, and we've had people report that they keep it right by their table when they're coaching. They use it as a reference. And I go,
Wow.
good. That's what it was intended for.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So how do you help your clients become more emotionally intelligent, emotionally literate, however you want to say it? How would you say you help them? It sounds like part of it is getting them into their bodies and understanding what's actually happening, but what's kind of the next step for you once they're aware of what's going on in their body? What do they do with that?
Well, I usually just beat them until they understand.
Okay, perfect. A good physical approach. I like it, Curtis.
Yes,
Wow.
that's that's my epistemological. Uh, so it's just as you were talking about, how do we educate or bring awareness to the body?
Mhm.
It's the same for me. It's the same process with the emotional territory as well, because we're always in some emotion, and so it's not as if we don't have that territory available. We do. We're just not educated. My buddy
Mhm.
Dan, he likes to call it emotional illiteracy. And, you know, 80% of the planet or more is emotionally illiterate, just like 80% of the planet or more 100 years ago was linguistically illiterate. They
Yeah.
couldn't, 80% of the planet couldn't read and write. And now 90% of the planet can read and write. So part of the impetus for the book was, maybe we can support emotional literacy, and just give them the book and say, thumb through it, see if any of these things resonate. I might give them a section to look at, right? So they don't have to go through all 150. Dan has a bunch of cards that are really good. So you can
Oh,
say,
nice.
is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? Uh, but if they, the first thing is to see emotions as a legitimate territory for learning,
Hmm.
and that they are there to help us. They're not something to be afraid of. So many people, in my experience, are afraid of the emotional territory.
Yeah, they don't want to go there.
And so that's one of the first things, is to, let's make it safe to explore.
Hmm.
You won't break. You won't forever, be a babbling idiot on the sidewalk somewhere. It's okay. We can get there. And so you titrate, just like everything, just like with somatics, you titrate, because you know. And kudos to Mark for really bringing this to my awareness around trauma.
Yeah.
Because there's so much trauma out there, and his teacher
Yes.
Paul was the one that brought it to him, so I credit him as well. And there's a good reason why people might be nervous or scared of entering the emotional territory, because they were traumatized
Yeah,
around
they've
it,
been damaged at some level.
right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I don't mean to make light of it in any way, shape, or form. And I know that lightness can allow us to approach difficult territories more easily sometimes.
I think it's also understanding more. I was talking to a client of mine recently, and she's like, I'm so angry about everything. And so we worked together, and we sort of came to a point where her homework was to go away, her assignment was to go away and actually write down all of the different things she was angry about, to actually, let's have a look at the territory of it, let's understand what's going on, and but then also to go that step beneath, and this is what we'll probably touch on next time, is going that step beneath in terms of, well, anger that's maybe got fear underneath it is probably going to feel different to anger because perhaps you're feeling judged by someone, or anger because you're disappointed by how life turned out, or whatever it may be. And I wanted, yeah, it was like, let's get into the territory of what is this anger. Anger is not what we tend to see it as, one amorphous. It's just like a blob, isn't it? Somehow, I'm angry. And then getting into maybe that's just me, but just getting into the nuances of it. And it sounds like what you've done would be really helpful to help people understand a bit more about as you said, the distinctions between them.
Yeah, and it's not like we're just in one emotion, we're in multiple emotions. And
Yeah.
I agree with you. Most of the time when I get underneath anger is sadness.
Yeah.
And uh, the anger is a way to cover it up for
Yeah.
men,
Yeah.
right? And it's under sadness. In my experience with women, this is just my experience. It doesn't mean it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I found that most women find it easier to be sad or cry than actually experience the anger that's underneath that sadness,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
And so it's reversed, right?
Yeah.
It's easier for men to feel anger than it is to feel the sadness, and it's easier for women to feel the sadness than it is for the anger.
Yeah.
And knowing that as a coach can really help in, okay, let's see what's being presented and see what's underneath it. I love that
Yeah.
approach, Allison. And one of the things, back to the distinctions around the body is also, they'll say, well, I feel achy. And I'll say, well, where do you feel that? And they go,
Mm-hmm.
everywhere.
I think you've got my clients.
You know? And so then I'll be really silly, but I do it to make a point. I go, so are you feeling achy in your eyelashes? And they'll go, no. I go, great. So it's not everywhere, because with somatics and with emotions and with linguistics, generalizations are not very helpful.
No.
So if we can get specific about what it is they're experiencing and where it is they're experiencing, it's much more helpful than everywhere or nowhere.
Yeah.
I feel nothing, right? So that's usually when I pinch them. Did you feel that?
I think you've designed your coaching agreement very carefully with them before you start pinching them.
Sure. It's not a heavy duty pinch, but that's just a prelude to the beating that comes later. Oh boy, I can't believe this is going to be on video. Okay. Remember, joking. Anyway.
Oh dear. So Curtis, we talked earlier before we started recording about that your Broadway sign up there, and I know that you trained as an actor earlier, so kind of in a previous life, and I just wondered how that training has impacted on your coaching, on the way you think about the body. What difference did that make for you?
Sure. Well, as an actor, I had to learn how to inhabit another observer,
Mm-hmm.
right? How does this character see the world?
Yeah.
Which, I don't care who the character is, they're going to see it differently than I do. And so that's number one, is like to immediately begin to discover how others see the world, and
Mm-hmm.
in that, how I see it. differently.
Yeah.
One, and I think the second most important gift from acting into coaching was listening and being present. Because if I'm thinking about what my next line is, I'm I'm not present to
Mm-hmm.
the situation and to my other actors. And then I'm just repeating lines. I'm not living a scene.
Mm.
So being present to the magnificent human being that's sitting across from me as a coach, and listening. And by listening, I don't mean just with the ears. I mean listening with my body, right? And sometimes clients hear me say that, and go, "What does that even mean?" And I go, "Well, there's some things that you'll just have to feel your way into, right? It's like you
Mm.
can't really know it until you experience it." And so those are two or three of the key uh, gifts that I would say, uh, at least the schools of acting that I went to, have brought to uh, coaching.
And I'm curious for myself as much as anything else, how do you learn to inhabit another personality, another person, to see the world? How do you get out of your own observation point and into someone else's observation point?
Yeah, it's a fabulous process, and the brilliant thing is the British, uh, and I'm speaking a little bit out of school because I haven't studied, but what I understand from reading people like Laurence Olivier and John Gielgud and those kind of brilliant actors,
Mm-hmm.
uh, they have a way of inhabiting their character from the outside in.
Mm-hmm.
So they will take cues from the author. Let's say the author says he wears a bowler hat. Right there is like, I am going to get me a bowler hat and I'm going to put it on my head, because wearing a bowler hat is different than wearing any other kind of hat or no hat,
Mm.
right? Because that's going to shift the observer right there.
Yeah.
Or you could hardly see the limp in his left leg that he got when he was attacked by a dog at the age of 5. Right? So that tells me, okay, I have a limp in my left leg, but I was also probably traumatized. Uh, and I can create a narrative around that young boy to support whatever it was the author put. Authors don't put things in unless they're important,
Yeah.
good ones, right? And so we could take our cues from what the author is telling us to help us build it that way, right? So that's the outside in. So I
Mm-hmm.
give myself a limp and a bowler hat.
Okay.
We're off to the races, right? And it develops from there, right? It's just, and then I'm interacting with other characters and what they're seeing, and that's the beauty of rehearsal, that you get to develop it over time and try things out, and the director will go, "That's terrible, don't do that." Or whatever, and you go, "Okay," but it's from a place of experimentation. And from the Stanislavski world, it is more of the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
What is the psychological or phantomological makeup of this character? What makes them tick? So in this case, it'd be, so how does this character breathe? What what formed him into the character that he is?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So those are the two different ways. And so for me, I like to use both.
I love it, because it's thinking through the psychology of it. How might they be thinking? But it's so clearly bringing the body into it somatically. If I embody someone who's got a slight limp in their leg, and again that thought of the trauma, what brought that along, or even, as I say, putting on a bowler hat, if you're wearing a bowler hat, you're probably not wearing jeans and a t-shirt. You're going to be in a suit. It brings the whole thing with it. So there's even something about how am I dressed? Does it suddenly bring my shoulders back? Oh, my embodiment shifted. Now what's that doing to me?
Brilliant. Yes,
I love
exactly.
it.
Yep.
That's
And you
fantastic.
probably have a brolly too. It's all one, right? It all goes together. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, but I can also see in terms of with clients that maybe kind of getting them just to, you know, try a slightly different embodiment. That's how this could be applied as well in the coaching. Let's just try shifting that little bit, see what happens.
Absolutely. And one of my Richard Strozzi Heckler, my somatic teacher, one of his favorite quotes that I remember is him saying, "Your body is shaped perfectly for the life that you've lived."
Mm.
Right. So that whatever body presents itself in front of you as a coachee, it's like you can look at that and say, I wonder what this person has lived through such that they are shaped this way.
Mm.
Right.
Brilliant question. Brilliant
Just
inquiry.
just from a curiosity point, and you listen to them and their story will unfold. But another Stuart Heller, another somatics teacher, uh, one of my favorite expressions of his is how you move through space is how you move through life.
Mm-hmm.
So this goes back to the beginning of our conversation around the Jokata,
Yeah.
and how you do the Jokata, right, reveals how you do life.
Yeah.
If you know, and what I heard you say is like, well, I have to get it right. Okay, that shows up in the body in a certain way.
Yeah.
That there's a tightness. It's like, oh, if I don't get it right, then what happens? So, yeah, it's
Yeah. And we say a similar thing in when I do my breath work, that the way you breathe is the way you live your life. You know, are you willing to take the breath in? Are you willing to take in your goodness? Are you willing to share? Are you closed, tight, and tense, or what's going on? So I guess there's many of these kind of bodily metaphors.
absolutely, we are coherent.
Yeah.
So how we do everything is an example of our lives.
Yeah.
You know, how we breathe, how we stand, how we sit, how we walk, how we make love, how we read, everything.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
it's great. But one other area I wanted to talk to you about, the time is racing past, but I wanted to talk to you about courageous conversations, because I know that's something that you're keen to help people have. And I wondered, from your perspective, what is a courageous conversation? Why do you believe they're so important? How do you help people have them?
So I'm going to paraphrase Julio Olaya, and my memory of what he says is that whatever is not operating well within an organization or a system is because of either lack of conversation or about whatever it is, or a conversation about whatever it is that's being held poorly.
Mm-hmm.
So a courageous conversation, in my opinion, is a conversation about an issue that nobody wants to talk about, but is very important to be talked about.
Yeah.
And again, back to causes and conditions. What are the causes and conditions that led us here? But also, what are the causes and conditions that we need in order to have a successful, courageous conversation? Because I can have a courageous conversation, you know, it's like, but the person across from me is like devastated or whatever, right? That's not a successful, courageous conversation.
No.
Right?
So it's not just a courageous conversation, it's a successful, courageous conversation is what you're aiming
Yeah,
for.
it's also to actually really mean conversation, which is to change together, right? That's having a conversation.
Yes.
Right? If I'm just talking at you, we're not having a conversation.
No.
And so a courageous conversation is one that's really important to me, and whatever the situation is, to have. And then as a coach, what are the conditions that need to be in place to support you being successful in having this conversation?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like, I remember this wasn't really a conversation; it was a request that I made to my partner Cheryl, and because we were talking about getting married, and neither one of us wanted to get married, but our friends were saying, well, why don't you have a commitment ceremony or something where we can celebrate you guys? And so one morning I was at the breakfast table and she was across, it's a big open space in the recycling closet with bottles and cans, and she was doing the recycling, and I chose that moment, right, to say,
Because.
well, what do you think about having a commitment ceremony, honey?
How did that go?
Not well at all. It wasn't like it was she got angry or anything like that. It's just she just didn't understand what I was talking about.
No. Bit out
Recycling,
of the blue.
yeah, it's totally out of the blue. And it just landed like a lead balloon, and we still haven't had the commitment ceremony. Oh goodness! But that's what I mean by context. Context is everything. Everything.
Yes.
And you can say whatever you need to say within the right context, right? If you know who they are, you know who you are, and you set the right context, you can say anything you need to say. So what's the context we need to set? And there's no guarantees.
Mm.
Right? It's like you do the best you can, and it could blow up in your face.
Well, this goes back to the old thing where we can only manage ourselves, we can only change ourselves. We're not responsible for how the other person reacts, what they do.
No, I can have a pretty good idea how they might react, and I can adjust myself in a certain way. But to your point, it's really their call.
Yeah.
Right? How they want to respond to it. And no matter how they respond to it, then it does come back to me in how I respond to that. Right? And so if I can maintain or come back to center, find my breath, remember why I wanted to have the conversation, remember who that person is to me, instead of immediately turning him into the enemy, then I have a much better chance of continuing that conversation, no matter how they react to the initial, right? So that's the Jokata practice, the two-step practice, all the embodiment practices. Is like another Strozzi expression is under pressure, humans revert to what they've practiced the most. And I guarantee you, still after 30 years of working with somatics, I still haven't practiced being centered in an argument more than I practiced not being centered. Just
that's me neither, if I'm honest.
But that doesn't mean stop practicing.
No, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's like the other day, this guy was speeding up our road, and it's a big, long straightaway. So a lot of people like to speed a lot, and it's right in front of our house.
Yeah.
And I went like this to stop him, to slow him down. And he stopped his car, he rolled down his window, and he goes, "Yes." And I go, "I would really appreciate it if you could temper your speed around this house." Pretty much like that. 10 years ago, or maybe last month, right? Depending again on the context, it could have been, right? And he heard me. I don't know if it'll change his behavior, but I wasn't an idiot.
Yeah.
So
it's managing ourselves as much as anything else. If we can manage ourselves to the best of our ability within that context.
Do you know what a backhanded compliment is?
I do.
So my son gave me the best backhanded compliment that I ever got. He goes, Dad, you're the reason I know people can change.
That is beautiful.
That,
That's
so,
perfect. Perfect. Curtis, we've pretty much come to the end of our time together, but I guess two last things. One is, if people want to find out more about what you're doing, where you are, where can they find you online, or other ways to reach you?
CurtisWatkins.com. That's pretty easy.
Okay, perfect. And I guess, do you just have any last thoughts, comments, anything else you'd like to share with our listeners about coaching with the body, or anything else you want to share with us before we finish today?
If you have an inkling that this is something that you might want to do, go for it. Go for it. Just trust yourself and go for it. It's a fabulous field.
On that note, as you've said that, there are a lot of, we've already discussed that it's a pretty unregulated industry. Yeah. And in terms of people getting good, high quality training, where would you suggest? What might be some options that people might look at if they are interested in going further?
Well, you can't go wrong with Mark Walsh.
Indeed. I can certainly vouch for that.
Yep. And his embodied facilitator course is brilliant. And I've already mentioned, so the Strozzi Institute for Somatics. Mm-hmm. Stuart Heller, I believe, is still teaching. He has online stuff around somatics that's brilliant as well. New Ventures West is a great ontological coaching school. James just retired, but I'm sure he didn't replace himself with, people that aren't as equally talented as he is. And then, of course, Newfield Network is also a brilliant ontological coaching school.
Great. Some really good suggestions there. Thank you. Just so that people have if they want to start looking into it, they've got somewhere to start looking for high quality training, because I think that is the key.
Yep. And you mentioned CTI, so I know
CTI, a lot of people. I'm CTI trained. Yep, absolutely. Who I also rate different school, different approach, but good, I think, solid quality.
Absolutely.
Coach training.
Yep.
Couldn't perfect. Agree. And now layered on with the embodiments as the embodied facilitator course. So perfect.
Great.
Great. Curtis, thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy to talk to you today. I really appreciate your time. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Yeah. Great to meet you, Allison. Thank you so much for inviting me on. And I look forward to next time our paths cross.
Absolutely. Thank you.